Banks breathing down your neck, they want their money. And, it just, the bank kept calling me every single day, hounding me. I was just at a breaking point because I was just so upside down and I didn't see any other way out. And, I was gonna take my life, and my wife forgot something that day and came home. So I hurried around and put the gun away, and she walked in and she's like, "What's wrong? What are you doing?" I'm like, "Nothing." And I changed my mind. She saved my life.
Coy Young was on the brink in 2020. He's a fourth-generation cattle rancher, and because of corruption and consolidation in the beef industry, he's about to be the last. He's selling off his entire herd and getting out of the business. And he's not the only one being affected. You, sitting at home, watching this video, are getting ripped off by the same people that are forcing Coy to shutter his farm.
The price of beef is up 20% from this time last year.
While beef prices in your local supermarket continue to skyrocket, and America's farmers suffer under increased costs, decreased sales, and rising suicide rates, well, the big four beef monopolies are raking in record profits. The CEO of National Beef, Tim Klein, claimed that high prices on the shelves, well, that's simply the result of supply and demand.
The beef industry is the most purest form of capitalism in this country, I believe. As demand goes up, price goes up. If demand goes down, price goes down.
But those profits aren't going to the farmers.
We're at a breaking point. Either something has to change or there isn't going to be any American ranchers left.
It's Bo, and this is the classroom for More Perfect Union. And today, we're going to talk about how the beef industry got rigged. Coy is one of 14,700 cattle farmers who will have to sell their farms or go bankrupt this year. Since the 1980s, the United States has lost more than 44% of family farms, and with them, the main streets and rural communities that they held together. Coy's story is like a lot of other ranchers, and he's leaving his business in debt. 100% of his check today, well, it's going to the bank.
The bank must have called and said they needed the check because their name's on it too, which basically they own you until you pay your debt.
Coy sold the last of his herd right after the new year. We talked to him at Christmas time about how his family was getting by.
When you're part of this life and you do it, the animals, you love them. I'd been hanging on to these guys for my cows for the past 3 years thinking it'd get better. It hasn't. You're losing your self-image. As a man, I'm trying to get over it, but it's like, the world doesn't have a use for you anymore. You need to do something else, is basically what I'm being told. The small guys don't have a chance.
You might not know how cattle ranching works, so let's break down the whole process for you, from the farm to your local supermarket. First, there are the ranchers. Coy is a calf cow producer. He raises cattle until they reach a certain weight.
You basically raise the animals from birth until they're an average of 7, 10 months, 12 months of age roughly. It's more by weight, so once they get up to 500, 600 pounds, we sell them at the local livestock market.
Ranchers like Coy sell at auction, which is supposed to be an open market with price discovery, meaning ranchers bid based on what they expect the market to look like at any given time. They look at things like the weather, the price of grain, and international sales. The cattle go on to a second rancher, known as a backgrounder, then on to the feedlot, where they are fattened until they're slaughtered. The slaughterhouses buy from the feedlots and package the meat, where it goes to you, the consumer.
Your primal ribs, your strip loins, your sirloin roast, hamburger.
But in the last few decades, the number of feedlots has decreased, and the packers, the ones who slaughter the cattle, have consolidated. This has had all kinds of consequences for consumers and farmers. For one, as consolidation increased, competitors dropped out, and ranchers had fewer buyers to sell to. What they were able to take home went down, way down.
My dad always used to say you could sell your calves in 1975 and buy a new Chevy pickup. Well, that still holds true today. You can sell your calves and buy a 1975 Chevy pickup.
Just look at this chart. The consumer has steadily been paying more for beef, while the farmer is earning less. Ranchers only get 39 cents of every dollar spent on burgers and steaks, whereas in 1970, they were getting 60 cents of every dollar.
What we've got is extreme monopoly power.
Peter is an economics reporter at the New York Times. He met Coy when he was working on a story not about American cattle ranchers, but about supply chain breakdowns in general.
He came up here and he was like, why are beef prices so high in the store and you guys are going broke? And I told him, well, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? Cargill, Tyson, JBS, and National Beef. Those are your 4 reasons why American farmers are going broke.
They're known as the Big Four. You might not have ever heard of these companies, but if you've ever bought or eaten beef, you've gotten it from them. The Big Four own 85% of the beef market. One way packers stifle competition is by making contracts with feedlots behind closed doors. Rather than going to auction like Coy does, packers sign alternative marketing agreements, or AMAs, with the feedlots, circumventing the open market that ranchers rely on and depressing that market. 73% of sales now happen through AMAs. And the pressure on feedlots to meet demand means they've consolidated as well. The bigger the feedlots become, the more tightly packed the animals are, which causes pollution in the land and the water. High-density feedlots also account for 7% of emissions that cause global warming in the United States. There really isn't one part of the chain that isn't feeling the squeeze: the consumer, the farmer, the animals, even the planet, except, of course, for the packers.
The person sitting at home is paying more, not because the ranchers, the workers are getting fairly compensated for their labor. The person sitting at home is paying more so that we can give more money to the shareholders of those 4 giant companies.
To understand how this happened, Peter says we need to go back to the turn of the 20th century.
So if we just back up for a second, going back to 1906, Upton Sinclair writes his famous novel. The jungle reveals that these stockyards in Chicago, where there's tens of thousands of cattle penned up and tens of thousands of workers laboring in just horrific conditions. And so there was this consumer outrage.
It's an outrage.
A man isn't safe even at his own dinner table.
Why doesn't the government step in?
And they did step in. At that point, there was a high level of concentration in the beef industry. 5 companies controlled 55% of the share of beef in the United States. And it wasn't just the beef industry that was monopolistic. That was true of the railroads, the steel yards, the coal fields, and the banks.
So President Woodrow Wilson unleashes this probe by the Federal Trade Commission, and 2 years later, Congress passes the Packers and Stockyards Act of 1921.
The Packers and Stockyards Act banned meatpacking corporations from manipulating and controlling prices, creating monopolies, or restraining fair competition, which, by the way, would probably include creating captive markets like the Packers do today with AMAs. For decades, there was bipartisan support for the idea that monopolies were bad. They were bad for the consumer, and they were bad for the worker. That all changed when a new philosophy on the regulation of corporations took hold, driven by economists at the University of Chicago School of Economics like Milton Friedman or Robert Bork, who you might remember from our explainer on Ticketmaster a few months ago. Robert Bork believed consumers benefited from larger conglomerates because their supposed increased productivity would make prices go down. Mergers and price discrimination, Bork argued, shouldn't be as important to the government as consumer welfare, allowing companies to get cheap products to the consumer. His work had a profound impact on President Ronald Reagan, who reshaped our antitrust laws, undoing decades of worker and consumer protection.
We've essentially been marinated in this idea that scale is the way to produce stuff that people can afford, quality products. That's how we get innovation. History tells us otherwise.
The largest packers went from owning just 25% of the market in the 1970s to now owning 85%.
It's a huge bottleneck system. They control all the slaughter and they control all the prices. And you're at their mercy.
Consolidation at this scale means that the market is fragile, and minor upsets can wreck the whole system. Think of early in the pandemic when there was a beef shortage. Slaughterhouses were shutting down because of COVID-19 outbreaks, and ranchers had no one to sell their beef to. Prices were skyrocketing in the supermarket, but ranchers weren't seeing the profits.
The pandemic didn't create this situation, it had revealed this situation.
That year, Coy had financed a herd of Angus beef that he was hoping to make a profit from. His sale was set for March 15th, 2020.
Our supply chains in America are the most powerful in the world, and they're all working very hard. They're working round the clock.
And that Friday, the Chicago Board of Trade feeder cattle price tanked to 108. And it hadn't been that low since November of 2010 or 11. I'm still recovering from it.
That was when Coy almost decided to take his life.
When you subject people who are accustomed to being able to support themselves to circumstances in which it's basically impossible to support themselves, there's real trauma associated with that.
Coy runs a weekly group for other ranchers struggling in their business or with their mental health.
There's nothing more that I'd rather do than to take care of cattle. And it's also building a legacy, something that my kids can have in the future and maybe even their kids.
We're ranchers talking about what we're doing, but we're just an analogy to the larger picture of America. It's corporate power dictating what's going on in the halls of Congress. And it is small business in general, not just ranchers. Small business is under attack.
Coy has a side business running a barbecue catering company, and he's transitioning to that full time. He's also devoting time to helping other farmers. He testified before Congress in 2022 over price fixing in the industry.
I come here before you today and try to save what is left of rural America.
I do feel very, passionate about this, to be an advocate for the American cattle farmers, because a lot of them are too scared to say anything. I don't have any cattle anymore. I have nothing left to lose.
We don't have to lose farmers like Coy, and we shouldn't. The Biden administration can enforce the Stockyards and Packers Act of 1921, which Coy likes to say the USDA is using as a doorstop now. It would mean ranchers like Coy wouldn't have to give up the work that they love, and the consumer wouldn't be buying hamburgers that only profit shareholders of big conglomerates.
We need to push back on this idea that deregulation and just allowing large companies to do what they will and pursue their own interests amounts to pursuing societal interests. That setup's really good for the shareholder, but we know what happens when shareholders get more money. They put it in their bank accounts, they send it offshore to Cayman Islands bank accounts.
We're in a second era of robber barons, just like Upton Sinclair wrote about at the turn of the century, and we already know the solution. Enforcing antitrust laws and increasing competition so that small farmers aren't pushed out.
We want to hear what you think about this story and what other topics you want to see us cover, so sound off in the comments below. And as always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications to support more videos like this one.